Hello, welcome to Writers on the Storm. I'm Paul Regalis, and here today we're with poet Jenna Lee, critically acclaimed poet, author of 2 books of poetry, 6 Rivers, and A History of the Cetacean American Diaspora. Hard to say. And she's also critically acclaimed lately. She the last book was the second place prize winner in the Elgin Awards, and we can also give it the Writers on the Storm Poets Book Award.
Why, thank you. I'm honored.
And lately you've been on a pretty good run as far as getting published in some pretty acclaimed literary journals and anthologies. It kind of goes in streaks, though, right?
Yeah. There've definitely been periods over the past year. I've had long lulls, and often the lead time between when you get a poem accepted, when it's published, and sometimes be a year, and then it comes out, and you forgot that you'd written the poem in the first place. So
and that's a bonus. That's exciting.
Yeah. It's like finding money in the couch or something.
Okay. Except that's usually a nickel or a penny. So I thought we'd just talk a little bit about writing.
Your couch, anyway. Yeah.
What kind of like your process, what works for you, and then you can end up reading from both of your books and some newer material.
Yeah.
But I think there are a lot of people, that like to write, and I think they're just interested in the whole process. Mm-hmm. But you're also a physician, and so your time must be limited, especially the time where you're actually thinking about writing, and you can't really be thinking about writing when you're doctoring. But can you make yourself write? Do you regularly try to write?
I do, and I know there are a lot of people who are resistant to the idea of making yourself write, but I guess that's been my process since I started writing. I began writing when I was like 13, and I've been basically using the same process ever since. So when I was 13, I would be like, okay, this week I'm going to write a poem, and it's going to be a nature poem. And I was very regimented about it from the very beginning, and I guess I never saw any real conflict between that and the spontaneity which people associate with writing. I think to some extent all poetry involves artifice. When you're writing a sonnet, there are certain rules. Even when you're writing a free verse poem, there's rules of language, and to some extent, everything. I know a lot of people are resistant to this idea that when you force yourself to write, it's not really writing. But I mean,
with me, it's not usually good.
Yeah.
So do you make yourself write every day?
I don't. I know people do. For me, that would just be physically impossible. I try to write every week. I tell myself, this week I'm going to write 10 lines that I'm not going to throw away, and I think that's a goal that I find manageable. If I set my goals too high, I would never get anything done. I would be paralyzed by it. But I tell myself, this week I'm going to write 10 lines. I could do it in the morning. I could do it at night. I could do it all at once. I could do it on the train.
But if it happens,
it helps to have that goal.
But if you're at the end of the week and you haven't written yet, is that kind of pressure where you now have to force yourself?
And then the next week I write 20.
Yeah.
But I find that if you took the poems I wrote following a prompt or following an assignment and compared those to poems I just wrote spontaneously, you wouldn't be able to tell which ones are which. I think.
Well, that's good.
I think once you get into the flow, the thing just takes on a life of its own, regardless of what it took to get you to your writing chair in the first place.
What's a good day's work of writing for you? You have like a certain number of lines, or it's just that this poem sort of has a shape, like you have a...
Yeah, so I tend to work in short form. I know it's not like that for a lot of prose writers, but I tend to write poems that tend to be, at most of my poems are either 1 or 2 pages long, usually not more than that. A good day, I guess, is when I've written a draft of a poem I like. And usually, that's it. For me, when I write a poem, it just comes out that day. Maybe I'll make changes here and there later, but really most of it happens that first day.
All right.
I'll know I've got something I can use.
And what works? What makes you happiest? I mean, when you're most proud of yourself, is it coming up with a new idea, getting it on paper, and you know it works, or when you finish a poem and you know that it's completely done?
I don't even know what coming up with an idea is, honestly. Like to me, that the phase of writing where I'm coming up with an idea and the phase where I'm writing are just so blent together. Like sometimes I'll have started writing and then the idea will come in the middle. So to me, and then it's all blurred. It's like it was like a drunken dream. You don't remember it happening. Like I guess, I mean the most exhilarating part, I guess, is, I mean I'm sure you feel this as a writer too, is during the writing itself, where you feel like you're walking on air. But the moment, I guess, when I realize I've written something is when it's done.
Okay.
I guess, like when I'm coming with the idea, it's like I'm barely I mean, at least for me, like I can't remember when I it's just all blends together. It's in that phase where things like that magic phase where the black box where something's happening in your head, you don't know what's happening.
I worry that I'm going to run out of ideas, and sometimes I will get an idea. A lot of times it's when I'm driving for some reason.
Yeah.
And I want to write it down before I forget the idea. And I'm happy when at least I know that the idea is saved there. It's like something that I can play with later.
Right. I wonder if, as writers, you put too much emphasis on the idea of the idea, right? Because every writer's nightmare is when you wake up in the middle of the night and you have an idea, and then you fall back asleep, you wake up, you can't remember it anymore. Right. And so we start to fetishize the idea. You know, the idea for the poem is being separate from the poem itself. And I guess I've kind of let go of that. Like,
okay. Well, I wonder if that's...
I don't have, like, some people say they have a notebook of ideas, like sitting around, like I have 100 ideas for poems I'm going to write, just haven't written them. Yeah, I've heard people say things like that, and for me it's not like that. If it were really an idea that was worth its salt, it would have become something already. Like, okay. But for me, that first step, the coming up with the idea step, almost doesn't exist for me. Like, but it's hard to explain without sounding like a weird mystic.
But if it's...
I feel like we put too much emphasis on this idea.
You're going to write
thing.
Whatever, 10 lines a week.
Yeah.
But while you're at work on a coffee break, you have an idea. You know that this would be a good poem.
Oh, I see what you mean.
You scribble down a few notes that you can then sort of...
Right, so I was sitting on my balcony a couple months ago, and I could hear a woman talking on her phone really loudly from the opposite balcony, and she was saying great lines. She was having an argument with someone, and these fascinating sentences were coming out of her mouth, and I knew I had to write them down and maybe use them later. I haven't used them yet. But things like that, yeah, I think it's important to have.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of people say it's important to have a notebook. These days, you can use the notes on your phone. The note, I mean, I started emailing myself, that kind of thing, yeah. A lot of that comes to nothing, but...
So, and I know you're not supposed to text while you drive your car, but when I get a lot of when I drive, I tend to get ideas, especially when I'm on the highway, and so I don't text and drive, but I'll actually write on a little notebook on
This is why you should not drive a car. This poem, actually, that one of the poems I'm going to read today, I was walking home from work, and I started writing it on my phone as I was walking, and I was just walking and hoping no one hit me.
So you can write and walk at the same time.
Yeah, you can't write and drive. That's why driving it's not good for us as a
society. But there's also kind of a built-in censor, because if I was writing, I got excited with this one story, and I was writing so much that the horn kept going off. Oh. And at first I thought somebody else was, like I was driving in somebody else's lane, but it was my horn, because I just wrote on the horn.
I see.
So it was, then I knew that I shouldn't write anymore. And do you do a lot of editing?
I'm not. I do that for me. I feel like giving away my secrets. People are going to judge me now. I feel like I edit like I became free when I realized these were not separate steps. Like the coming up with the idea, the writing, the revising. Like it's kind of all one step, right? Like when I'm revising, I'm kind of in the same frame of mind as when I'm writing. It's just more writing. Okay. I feel like a lot of the editing happens as I'm writing. They're kind of inseparable steps. I don't really have that phase where when I'm done writing, I take out the red pen and I start crossing things out.
But what about you write a new poem, and then the first time you read it at a reading, at an open mic, and there's a line that doesn't, that
then
you take out a red pen after reading.
But yeah.
And do you have friends, poet friends, that you show your work to when you're not sure whether they're done or not?
I do. I have a few good friends who are, I think there's a danger to living inside your own head too much, in the sense that I understand everything I'm thinking. Like, I think all my jokes make sense, but when I show it to someone, maybe it's not comprehensible. So I think it's good to have that sounding board. I have a few good friends. it doesn't take much. I have one good friend I trust a lot, and I have a few good friends who I also trust a lot. I'm not going to diss anyone on TV. But yeah, no, that's part of my process, and I
So as
admire
long as you
writers
find
who
the
are able
right
to do it.
friends.
Yeah, that's the key, right? Yeah.
The danger I have found is if you like have an idea or the beginning of a piece, and the person you share it with kind of takes it over and writes the ending for you, something like that. It's this is what you ought to do, and then it's really not your piece anymore.
And
that's happened, yeah.
Right. I've had people try to do that, but usually I resist it so much, and I'm like, well, no, the ending is actually like this, and then sometimes actually their false ending drives the real ending out of me.
Okay.
I guess maybe I'm just like stubborn, so I don't easily accept. If somebody tacked an ending out of my poem, I'd be like, that doesn't feel quite right.
Right.
What would feel quite right is, and then as I'm trying to, I guess, spell that out to myself, then the real ending comes to me. So that's another way in which I think having a writing group or a single writing friend can be helpful.
And you've kept in touch with writing friends for years?
Yeah, my oldest writing friend is someone I've known, 9-10 years.
And so you said you started writing poetry when you were 13?
Yeah.
And have you noticed like phases and waves, changes in style?
Yeah. I mean, some more cataclysmic than others. I mean, as you go through changes, and I feel like they parallel life changes. When you have a life change, sort of the poetry changes with it. I'm sure there have been other more minor changes, as I've learned about a new form and incorporated it into my repertoire or whatever. But
or where you live.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So you grew up outside of Minneapolis,
right?
And then you moved to Boston for a while, then New York City, and now New Hampshire, which is
right, which is
really
very different
with the other.
Yeah, which of these is not like the other. One thing about being a writer is you develop a certain self-consciousness. I remember when I first moved to New York, I was always asking myself, when am I going to start writing the New York poems? Why hasn't it happened yet? And it's kind of like when you have dreams, like you always dream you're back in high school, and it's like, when am I going to start dreaming about where I am now? When is that going to hit? And when you're always asking yourself that, I don't know if that makes it hit any faster, but...
Or do you write about New York City after you leave New York City?
I've actually not written about New York City at all since I left New York City. Moving to New Hampshire has been, I think, has opened up new doors in my writing. I mean, it's definitely exposed me to a lot more nature, which I think is good for everyone, not just writers. So.
But yeah, and especially poets, and
right, yeah,
and we have a pretty good history of poetry in New Hampshire too.
Right.
Okay, so why don't you read some poetry for us, and you can do a mix. Is there? Do you have a lot of new stuff? Are you close to having enough for a new?
I
book?
like to think so. Probably my most active writing months of the year are like April and November, which is when I get my snow tires on. When I get my snow tires off, I noticed that because I noticed I have a lot of poems about my snow tires. But so I'm doing. I feel like for the past week has actually been a good week for me. I'm sure I'm jinxing myself by saying that, and I have a lot of material. I think the hardest part for me as a writer is taking individual poems, for me, very short pieces, 1 or 2 pages each, and putting them together and trying to make them coherent into something book length that has an arc and so forth. Okay,
there's something.
Right. For me, that's the phase I've never really wrapped my mind around. I think I guess it's something that probably there was an era when poets didn't have to worry about that, right? Like probably, like Donne, he probably didn't worry about what themes are going to tie my next book together. But
right.
Yeah, so that I have a lot of poems sitting around, but not really sure what to do with them right now.
Okay, so you're going to read a few of your newer poems?
Yeah, I'd like to do that. So I thought I would start with a relatively recent poem. This is the one that sort of came to me as I was walking home from work, and I wrote it without being hit by any cars. And it's the title, which I stole from a Chris Christopherson song, is "Please Don't Tell Me How the Story Ends." A Vermont man rural, lacerated his knee with a chainsaw doing tree work one summer. The wound festered, not angrily, but with a slow, simmering puzzlement. This lasted years. One day he fingered it, felt something hard inside, pulled out a shiny piece of glass. Another time, he pulled a blade of grass out of it. Then a whole maple leaf, so perfect it filled Canadian flag makers with envy. Started feeling mighty proud of himself, like King Arthur when he made that stone belch up his sword. Began pulling bigger and bigger things out of his knee. A dime, a dollar bill, a bandana, a quail's egg, and that quail hatched too. Got to calling himself the Wizard, made the circuit of local festivals, state fairs. You would think this story ends someplace bad, a psych ward, OR, or early grave. A wimpled lady shoveling dirt on a corpse that died of 3 parts delusion, 1 part gangrene. But I think the times have just gotten to you. The pessimists opining on TV have dragged you down to their level. The Vermonter, he's still making the rounds, still finding 7-Eleven receipts, perfectly folded road maps, and poetry broadsheets tied with slim blue ribbons in his knee. Sometimes butterflies come foaming out, 5 or 6 at once, beating lavender wings.
Oh, that's great. That's really funny too. So that's a little bit different from, especially the poems in Six Rivers. It's it's more mythic and kind of like, I guess maybe like local fable. Bringing in the fantastic.
It's a kind of poem I don't think I would have written before I moved to New Hampshire and got to know some local people and their stories. I don't think the word tree work, for example, was in my vocabulary before I got here, but that was a phrase I heard.
That's great. So it starts off with a wound, and just you're a physician. I mean, is there a line where there's a situation, with a patient that it's just so interesting that you want to write about it, but then you feel that there's a boundary issue where it's
right. I think that's a constant ethical quandary. I think for a lot of people who work in healthcare who are also writers. To what extent does the story belong to you? To what extent does the story belong to someone else?
But as soon as a patient shows up and there's a map, in their kneecap, then I
right,
think that
then
becomes public
I'm sorry,
domain,
but I'm taking that from you. Yeah, no, it's definitely a thing that, and I think I mean, I think it comes. You know when you're starting to steal, and when you've made it your own. And I think, yeah, there's yeah.
Great, and so that was just published recently.
Yeah, in the Carolina Quarterly,
nice.
a lit mag.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try not to.
All right, I can read some more
Sure.
if you like. All right, so this is an ekphrastic poem, a poem I wrote about a painting recently. The painting is a Rubens painting. It's called, I'm sure I'm going to butcher this, Venus Frigida, which is the Latin title of the painting, which means the frozen Venus. I saw it on my friend Laurette's website. She has a lot of art there, and it inspired me to write this poem. Venus Frigida. The frozen Venus is the image caption, a homage to the jaundiced Latin maxim that all love grows cold when food and drink are absent. Depicted in a sickly green-lit landscape, the fair-flanked goddess squats on bald red fabric and hugs her wind-nipped trunk to fend off gangrene from frostbite, while her son emits a rattly cough in the vicinity of her waxen knees. She pointedly ignores a goat-eared man-beast, an umber-muscled satyr hovering blackly mere inches from the pair, a bulging basket on his arm. I don't buy it for a fraction of a second. I've been cold before. If Madame Venus were really cold, she'd grab that damask beneath her hock and wrap it round her fat knobbed back. I've been cold. If I were in this tableau, I'd grab pale Cupid, press him to my memories, absorbing all his heat. Good Lord, I'd gladly tackle the brown goat man himself and wrestle him to the dirt. That Terence was a hack. If love were great enough, it would conquer. Come back.
Nice. That's interesting, and that brings up another interesting point. You also paint, right?
I like to, I feel it's an insult to real painters to say that I paint, but I dabble in watercolor. I try to do it seriously. I'm not very good at it. But
and are there ever connections or overlaps where a painting will be inspired by one of your own poems, or you'll like visualize, or you'll try to put something from a painting that you've done into a poem?
Interestingly, no. I feel the things that inspire poems, at least for me, I can't speak, the things that inspire me to paint a picture, the things that inspire me to write a poem are kind of different things. They're often non-overlapping.
But
the things that inspire me to write a
yet.
poem might be like a sentence I've heard someone say, whereas the thing that might inspire a poem is like, that's an interesting bend in that branch, and it's
Okay.
yeah. So thus far, it has not happened.
It could work.
Right.
So
yeah.
your fourth book of poetry could be that.
Maybe.
and
Yeah.
then
no-
it would have.
Yeah. See, now I'm stealing one of your ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I gotta give you credit for that.
Sure. So yeah, keep.
All right.
let's
I'll read
read
one
some more.
other newish poem. It's about a town near where I live. It's called Dispatch from Hanover, New Hampshire. It's also a recent poem. Dispatch from Hanover, New Hampshire. 1. Mid-February is here. The president, inaugurated 3 short weeks ago, just turned the EPA's reins over to a climate change denier, Salon laments. Today's high, 49 degrees. Ice sculptures across the Dartmouth Green are melting fast, limbs snapping off and shattering. Funny that when temps start rising, ice gets cloudy colored, as if it thinks, like some postmodern writers, opaqueness has the power to thwart extinction. Just yesterday, upon this chiseled griffin's outstretched paw, there perched an owl of ice. 2. At 3 years old, I had a vivid nightmare. My mom was standing at her bedroom window, lifting the gauzy curtain with one hand so she could see. The lamp cast golden light where she lingered on that crisp midwinter evening, excitedly calling me to come and look. You won't believe this. Right here on our block, a big ice sculpture, a miracle, all gleaming beneath the Botton's porch lights. Rapt, she stared. But I was mad at her, some childish snit, and feigned I did not hear her, and dragged my feet. And when I relented, there was nothing there.
Nice. So that's it. There is an image of ice sculpture. So that's
Yeah.
like if the ice sculpture connects to the poem, your paintings can.
Yeah.
And then it goes into a memory of your mother.
Right.
Does that happen much, where you like childhood will seep itself in, or?
I think we never outgrow our childhood. Yeah, for me, there's still countless childhood memories I'm still working through. When I was writing this book, it's funny, I think we were talking earlier about big breakthroughs and big changes in one's writing. I think when I was first starting to write, and even when I was still working on my first book, I wrote a lot about things that were happening to me now, relationships, men, work, and I kept my childhood in this box I didn't want to look at, and slowly over the past few years I've been kind of opening that box and working through that material, which a lot of it goes down pretty deep, so I feel like I still have a lot of that material left to work through.
And the whole idea of sort of like the 2 sections to the poem, where it's like you have the image and the ice sculpture, and then it's part 2 that it's the dream or your mother. And does that work, or is that like a certain style where you have 2 different images, but there's a connection, and that kind of keeps the poem dynamic?
So yeah, the poem is divided into 2 halves, which are the same length as each other. The first, I guess, takes place in the present, me seeing the Dartmouth ice sculptures melting. I don't know if you've ever seen, they have this great festival at Dartmouth in the winter where they just have like 20 ice sculptures, and by the time I got there, most of them were half melted. You couldn't tell where they were. And I guess that brought me back to this nightmare. The thing, and I guess when the memory triggered the other memory, I knew I had to write about it because I guess it's not something that you would normally think of as nightmare. I have the typical kind of nightmare too, where like dinosaurs are chasing you down escalators. I have those too, but I suddenly realized that this is what the poem is about. It's about this thing that frightened me so deeply that this dream I had 30 years ago has still stayed with me, and why has it stayed with me? What frightened me so deeply about it? And it was something I never unpacked until I wrote this poem.
Yeah.
And I realized there's really
that's how nightmares work. I think they're always there, and it's
and I realized what it was about. It was about, to some extent, guilt, right? Guilt us, because of some stupid, resentment or some stupid peak that we don't take the action we have to take in time, and then it's too late.
So time has gone by a little bit faster than I thought it would. Mm-hmm. So we just maybe go back to your first two books just for a few.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. So this is my first book, Six Rivers, which was published by New York Quarterly Books in 2011. And I'll just read a poem from there. This is a poem called Trick. America, you're the Halloween costume my immigrant father rented and never returned. Dad clambered inside your baggy interior because he wanted his share of the season's sweet treats. With your reptilian tail, Dad batted away his rivals and scampered on to his goal. Dressed up in you, America, my father seduced my starry-eyed mother behind a tall hedge. But now, the costume shop is demanding you back. They call our house daily, ringing the phone off its hook.
Nice. It's a really powerful poem. This book is very cool how it's set up in 6 sections, all connected to a different river, some real, some mythic.
Yeah.
So maybe 1 or 2 more.
Yeah, all right. So this is the poem we were talking about before the show. It's a tanka, which is a tanka is a Japanese verse form. It's very short. It's not quite as short as a haiku, which would be even shorter. I'm just mocking my own tendency to make hand gestures. It's called Tanka, Upper West Side. Winter boy, each of your fingertips is a bluebird. I can feel their beaks and soft cheeks against the inside of my warm, drunk fist.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was a request from me. And do you want to end with one from the award-winning book, the Elgin Silver Medal?
So this is my newest book from Anchor and Plume. It's called A History of the Cetacean American Diaspora. It's supposed to be a pun on Asian American diaspora, which is a phrase that gets tossed around a lot. And I'm sort of treating those ideas, those issues of identity and so forth, but through the lens of nature images, whale, in particular whale imagery. And so I thought I'd just read the title poem to whet people's appetite. The poem, I guess I already told you, is called A History of the Cetacean American Diaspora. Zoologists inform us the whale evolved from a 4-legged grassland mammal, a pampas-dwelling grampus, a rope-tailed veldt roamer. This slope-nosed primeval camel, some million years ago, made up his mind to settle in new digs beneath the sea, exchanging hooves for flippers, sky for brine. The whale's a child of immigrants, like me. I know the burn the surf-drunk humpback feels when, self-flung, he upflounces out of water, dashing the sun's hot sclera with salt splatter. I also know the glacial chill that seals his tug-sized heart off from the universe when, flubbing flight, he drops back down with force.
Great. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
And thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Writers
to
on
be
the
here.
Storm, and the two books are very easy to get online. A history of the cetacean American diaspora, and much easier to read. The title is Six Rivers. Both great books. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for
good talking to you,
having
and
me.
thanks for watching.